Among history's most feared and controversial names, two men stand whose actions still haunt the pages of time: Benito Mussolini and King Carol II of Romania. Each left behind a trail of destruction, ambition, and ideology that reshaped the world in war and ruin. Let us begin with the first, Benito Mussolini. Benito Amilcare Andrea Mussolini was born on the 29th of July in the year 1883 in the small town of Dovia di Predapio, located in the province of Forli in northern Italy. What forces shaped the boy who would one day rule a nation with an iron fist? How did a quiet village child, born to a blacksmith and a schoolteacher, grow into the founder of fascism? Was his rise the product of fate, ideology, or ruthless ambition? The road from his humble cradle to the heart of totalitarian power begins here. Please watch my full video until the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you. Now, let us dive into the full story. Benito Mussolini's early life was deeply influenced by his parents, his father Alessandro, a socialist blacksmith who idolized revolutionaries, and his mother Rosa, a devout Catholic who taught at the local school. Named after Benito Juarez of Mexico and two Italian radicals, young Benito was born into a home full of political passion and ideological contradiction. From an early age, he showed a temper and a rebellious nature, wielding words and fists alike to assert his will. These early tensions between discipline, defiance, and destiny would follow him throughout his life, setting the stage for what was to come. Benito Mussolini's childhood was anything but quiet. Though his mother instilled discipline and the importance of education, Benito often clashed with authority. He was sent to a boarding school run by the Salesian brothers in Faenza, but his hot temper and unruly behavior quickly became a problem. During one outburst, he stabbed a fellow student with a penknife, an act that earned him severe punishment and confirmed his growing reputation for violence. His parents removed him from the religious institution and placed him in a secular school in Forlimpopoli. There, Mussolini's academic performance improved, but his aggressive and prideful nature never softened. Even as he earned a certificate to become an elementary school teacher in the summer of 1901, Benito remained a young man simmering with restlessness. He carried with him not only his father's revolutionary ideas, but also a deep sense of personal pride and defiance. Beneath the surface, he saw the world not as it was, but as something he could bend to his will. He questioned religious teachings, dismissed traditional discipline, and began to lean into the writings of radical thinkers. Even at this young age, Mussolini seemed determined not to follow a path already laid out, but to carve one of his own, regardless of cost or consequence. The seeds of rebellion had already taken root. In the summer of 1902, barely 19 years old, Benito Mussolini fled to Switzerland, not in search of adventure, but to escape mandatory military service. With little money and no steady work, he survived by taking odd jobs, including work as a stonemason. Yet even while laboring in the shadows, Mussolini was devouring ideas. He studied the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche, Karl Marx, and Georges Sorel, absorbing philosophies that glorified power, upheaval, and revolution. It was in the Swiss city of Lausanne that Mussolini began to find his voice, first as a fiery speaker, and then as a writer. He worked for socialist newspapers and gave speeches to Italian laborers, railing against the monarchy, capitalism, and the church. His passion was undeniable. Soon, he was appointed secretary of the Italian Workers' Union in Lausanne, giving him his first real taste of political leadership. But Mussolini's outspokenness brought trouble. In June 1903, he was arrested for inciting a general strike and spent 2 weeks in jail. That same year, he was deported from Switzerland, only to sneak back in again shortly after. His rebellious spirit made him both admired and feared within leftist circles. These Swiss years were more than a political awakening. They were the training ground for a man who would later use those same revolutionary instincts not to liberate, but to dominate. His journey toward fascism had quietly begun. By the time Benito Mussolini returned to Italy in late 1904, his name was already circulating in socialist circles. He joined the Italian Socialist Party, and over the next few years, his energy and ambition catapulted him into prominence. Mussolini began working for various leftist publications and poured his convictions into writing. He was a gifted communicator, sharp, passionate, and provocative. In 1912, he reached a career milestone when he was appointed editor of the party's official newspaper, Avanti. Under his leadership, circulation soared. His editorials were bold and uncompromising, attacking the monarchy, the church, and reformist socialists alike. Mussolini positioned himself as the voice of revolutionary socialism in Italy, a man unafraid of stirring controversy. His pen became a weapon, and his platform gave him influence far beyond his modest origins. He did not just echo Marxist theory, he reshaped it to suit his own radical vision. He admired Marx and Engels, but was equally drawn to Nietzsche's ideas about strength and will. This unusual blend of socialism and authoritarianism made him a figure of both fascination and suspicion within the movement. For a time, Mussolini seemed destined to become a major force within Italian socialism. But beneath the surface, his loyalty to class struggle was already shifting. Power, not principle, had begun to take hold. And as the world drifted toward war, so too would Mussolini drift toward a new identity that would break with everything he once claimed to believe. The outbreak of World War I in the summer of 1914 cracked the foundations of socialist unity across Europe, and Mussolini stood at the center of that divide in Italy. While the Italian Socialist Party strongly opposed the war, Mussolini took a bold and shocking stance. He supported Italian intervention. At first, he urged neutrality, but soon his editorials turned, arguing that war could be a revolutionary force capable of reshaping nations and awakening the people. This pivot cost him dearly. In November 1914, he was expelled from the Socialist Party. To his critics, it was betrayal. To Mussolini, it was liberation. No longer bound by party doctrine, he founded a new newspaper, Il Popolo d'Italia, and began promoting a new ideology, one that fused nationalism with revolutionary energy. He no longer spoke of class struggle. He spoke of national strength, sacrifice, and the rebirth of Italy. The war, he claimed, was a necessary crucible to purify and empower the Italian people. He denounced Marxist internationalism and declared that Italy's destiny was greater than party lines or class divisions. His words found support among disillusioned veterans, nationalists, and industrialists. The man who once championed the proletariat was now calling for unity through national will, not equality. This was the moment Benito Mussolini left socialism behind. What replaced it would soon shake the entire world. After his dramatic break with socialism, Benito Mussolini poured his energy into building something entirely his own. In November 1914, he founded Il Popolo d'Italia, the People of Italy. This was not just a newspaper. It was a vehicle for his emerging worldview, which blended nationalism, militarism, and revolutionary rhetoric into something entirely new. Its pages echoed with fiery calls for war, discipline, and sacrifice, all in the name of national rebirth. Backed by a mix of funding from Italian industrialists, foreign governments and nationalist supporters, the paper became Mussolini's platform for shaping a new ideology. He rejected socialism's emphasis on class and instead preached revolutionary nationalism, a belief that the strength of the state should transcend divisions of wealth or background. The individual, he claimed, must serve the nation completely. His words struck a chord with many Italians, especially those who felt betrayed by traditional politics. By 1915, as Italy prepared to enter World War I, Mussolini had already planted the seeds of fascism. He envisioned a strong, unified nation led by a new elite, not of blood, but of will. The paper also helped him build alliances with like-minded thinkers, war veterans, and street fighters. These early years laid the foundation for the movement that would soon take shape, not as a party of the people, but as a force of control, fear, and power. Fascism had not yet been named, but its heartbeat had begun. In 1915, Mussolini enlisted in the Royal Italian Army and joined the Bersaglieri, an elite infantry unit known for speed and aggression. Though his enlistment was in part a political gesture, aligning his fate with the war effort he so passionately supported, Mussolini experienced the brutal realities of trench warfare firsthand. On the Isonzo front, he fought in fierce battles and was eventually promoted to corporal for his resolve and bravery under fire. His service, however, ended abruptly in early 1917 when a mortar bomb exploded nearby during a training accident, injuring him severely. Shrapnel embedded throughout his body, he was hospitalized and eventually discharged. But the damage was not only physical. The war hardened him, deepened his disdain for weakness, and solidified his belief in violence as a tool of national transformation. Back in civilian life, Mussolini returned to Il Popolo d'Italia with renewed purpose. He no longer saw politics as a space for negotiation. He saw it as a battlefield. His experiences in uniform sharpened his vision. Italy, humiliated and fractured after the war, needed strong leadership, absolute unity, and a rejection of liberal democracy. World War I did more than wound Mussolini's body, it forged the core of his political identity. The soldier who returned from the front no longer dreamed of revolution for the working class. He dreamed of revolution for the nation, led by men like himself, ruthless, disciplined, and utterly devoted to power. By March of 1919, Benito Mussolini had moved beyond journalism. He was now building a movement. In Milan, he gathered war veterans, nationalists, and disillusioned former socialists to form the Fasci Italiani di Combattimento, or Italian Combat Leagues. These groups would become the backbone of the fascist movement. Mussolini's message was simple. Italy had been betrayed by weak governments, and only bold, violent action could restore national pride. The movement promised to fight socialism, communism, and chaos in the streets, but it also borrowed from leftist tactics. Fascist squads, known as black shirts, roamed Italian cities attacking political opponents, breaking up strikes and beating dissenters. They operated with impunity, often with silent approval from police and landowners fearful of a Bolshevik-style revolution. Fascism in these early days was not a coherent ideology. It was a reaction, a fury-driven response to Italy's post-war humiliation, economic collapse, and fear of social disorder. Mussolini used that fear as fuel. He presented fascists as saviors, not thugs, patriots who would bring discipline to a nation in crisis. The violence escalated, but so did Mussolini's influence. He was becoming a symbol of action in a country paralyzed by indecision. To many Italians, especially the middle and upper classes, the black shirts didn't represent terror, they represented hope. A dangerous hope, born in the streets. In the fall of 1922, Benito Mussolini saw his moment. Italy was in political turmoil, weak coalitions, labor unrest, and the growing threat of socialism had paralyzed the government. Sensing opportunity, Mussolini and his fascist leadership organized a dramatic show of force, the March on Rome. From the 27th to the 29th of October, thousands of black-shirt militants advanced on the capital. Though most were scattered across surrounding cities, the threat of armed insurrection was enough to unnerve the establishment. Prime Minister Luigi Facta asked King Victor Emmanuel III to declare martial law. The king refused. Instead, the monarch invited Mussolini, then safely waiting in Milan, to form a new government. On the 31st of October, Benito Mussolini became the youngest prime minister in Italian history at just 39 years old. He arrived in Rome dressed in black, surrounded by armed followers, claiming he had seized power by revolution, though in truth it had been handed to him by a frightened monarchy and a desperate elite. The March on Rome marked a turning point not only for Mussolini, but for all of Europe. It showed that democracy could be dismantled not just through war, but through fear and political collapse. Mussolini now stood at the threshold of unchecked power, with the state, the streets, and the story all under his control. Once in office, Benito Mussolini moved quickly to secure total control. Though he initially led a coalition government, he had no intention of sharing power for long. By combining legal maneuvering with street-level intimidation, he began dismantling Italy's democratic system piece by piece. In 1923, the Acerbo law granted 2/3 of parliamentary seats to any party receiving just a quarter of the vote, a rule tailor-made for the rising fascists. In the 1924 elections, Mussolini's alliance swept the vote, aided by widespread violence and voter suppression. But victory came at a cost. When socialist leader Giacomo Matteotti publicly denounced the rigged results, he was kidnapped and murdered by fascist thugs. The killing sparked national outrage and nearly toppled Mussolini's government. Rather than retreat, Mussolini pushed forward. On the 3rd of January in 1925, he delivered a defiant speech to Parliament, accepting moral responsibility for fascist violence without apology. It was a turning point. From that day forward, Mussolini ruled not by consent, but by decree. Opposition parties were banned. Press freedom vanished. Trade unions were dissolved. Local governments were replaced with fascist appointees. Italy had become a one-party police state, with Mussolini calling himself Il Duce, the leader. Through fear, law, and relentless propaganda, he transformed a fragile democracy into a dictatorship. And for millions of Italians, the new era had begun, not with a bang, but with a clenched fist behind a podium. With his dictatorship now solidified, Benito Mussolini set about reshaping Italy in his image. Every aspect of life, from schools and newspapers to family values and architecture, became a stage for fascist control. Mussolini declared that everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. This was not just a slogan, it was a blueprint. Political repression became law. All other parties were banned, and even moderate voices were silenced. Secret police hunted down dissenters, and public loyalty to the regime became a matter of survival. Yet alongside this brutal grip came a flurry of state projects aimed at impressing the public. Mussolini launched grand infrastructure campaigns, draining swamps, building railways, and founding new towns like Littoria and Sabordia. These efforts were praised as symbols of national strength, even as civil rights disappeared. Education was overhauled to instill loyalty in children. Textbooks taught obedience, nationalism, and the myth of Mussolini's greatness. Propaganda films showed him harvesting wheat, swimming rivers, or standing tall before massive crowds. He became a modern Caesar in black uniform, a leader above criticism, above doubt. This cult of personality was not accidental. Mussolini's control over the press, film, and radio ensured that his image was everywhere, his voice unavoidable. For many Italians, especially the young, he was not just the head of government, he was the nation itself. The man who once questioned authority had now become its most ruthless embodiment. As Benito Mussolini tightened his grip at home, he turned his eyes outward. He believed Italy had been cheated in the peace following World War I and was destined to rise as a new Roman Empire. At the heart of his foreign policy was Spazio Vitale Living Space, a fascist vision that called for expansion into Africa, the Balkans, and the Mediterranean. His first moves were bold. In 1923, Italy occupied the Greek island of Corfu following a border dispute. Later, he annexed the city of Fiume and pushed into Albania. But Mussolini's most infamous campaign came in 1935 when Italy invaded Ethiopia. Despite condemnation from the League of Nations, Italian forces used brutal tactics, including chemical weapons, to crush resistance. The conquest was declared a triumph, and Mussolini's popularity soared. At home, fascist propaganda painted these invasions as civilizing missions. In truth, they were fueled by racism, ambition, and the need to distract Italians from domestic problems. Mussolini envisioned Italy as a dominant colonial power and used every tool from intimidation to myth-making to justify aggression. He also sent troops to support Francisco Franco during the Spanish Civil War, forging ties with other authoritarian leaders. These actions brought Italy closer to Adolf Hitler's Germany. As Mussolini sought glory through conquest, he led his country down a dangerous path, one paved with violence, illusion, and the growing shadow of war. By the late 1930s, Benito Mussolini had committed Italy to a new and deadly partnership. While earlier he had mocked Adolf Hitler, the tides of power soon drew them together. In 1936, Mussolini aligned Italy with Nazi Germany, declaring the formation of the Rome-Berlin Axis. That same year, he withdrew Italy from the League of Nations, signaling his rejection of international diplomacy. In 1939, Mussolini shocked Europe again by annexing Albania, further confirming his imperial ambitions. When World War II began later that year, Mussolini initially held back. Italy was militarily unprepared, and the war's outcome was uncertain. But in June of 1940, as France teetered on collapse, he made his move, declaring war on France and Britain, hoping to share in the spoils of a seemingly inevitable German victory. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Italy's military campaigns in North Africa, Greece, and the Balkans quickly faltered. German forces often had to bail out Mussolini's armies. Instead of becoming an equal partner to Hitler, Mussolini became a subordinate, a junior player in a war he could not control. The alliance with Hitler deepened as the war dragged on, tying Mussolini's fate to Germany's. His speeches became more radical, his regime more desperate. Italy, once promised glory, was instead dragged into ruin. The man who once promised national rebirth had bound his country to disaster, and the cost in lives, in cities, in trust was only beginning to unfold. By 1943, the war Mussolini had embraced was collapsing all around him. Italy was bombed relentlessly, its armies defeated, and the people starving. Trust in Mussolini's leadership had eroded. Even within his own fascist Grand Council, support was crumbling. On the 25th of July, after a secret vote by his own ministers and a quiet nod from King Victor Emmanuel III, Mussolini was arrested and removed from power. The the fall of the regime was swift. Italians took to the streets, tearing down fascist symbols. But the story did not end there. In September, as Italy signed an armistice with the Allies, Adolf Hitler ordered a daring rescue. German commandos stormed the hotel in the Apennine Mountains where Mussolini was being held and flew him to safety, or rather, to further captivity. Hitler installed Mussolini as the head of a puppet regime in northern Italy, the Italian Social Republic. Though he was now il duce again on paper, in truth he was a figurehead controlled by Berlin. The Republic was built on betrayal, brutality, and German bayonets. During this final phase, Mussolini's Italy became a land of executions, civil war, and German occupation. His words carried little weight. His government, held together by fear and foreign guns, was despised. Once hailed as the savior of Italy, Mussolini now ruled over its ashes, isolated, desperate, and hurtling toward the end. In the final days of April 1945, as Allied forces advanced and Nazi Germany crumbled, Benito Mussolini made one last attempt to escape. Disguised in a German uniform, he fled north with his mistress, Clara Petacci, and a small convoy of loyal followers. Their goal was Switzerland or perhaps escape through Austria, but it was too late. On the 27th of April, near the village of Dongo, Italian communist partisans intercepted the convoy. Mussolini's disguise failed. He was recognized and arrested on the spot. What followed was swift and brutal. On the morning of the 28th of April, Mussolini and Petacci were executed by firing squad near the town of Giuliano di Mezzegra. Their bodies were then taken to Milan and hung upside down in a public square, a final, grim spectacle intended to show the death of fascism. The man who had once commanded roaring crowds now faced the jeers of an angry mob. It was a violent end to a violent reign. But Mussolini's legacy didn't die with him. In the decades that followed, scholars, survivors, and citizens would continue to debate the meaning of his rule. Was he a visionary turned tyrant or a thug wrapped in nationalist rhetoric? His rise remains a chilling example of how fear, ambition, and propaganda can dismantle democracy from within. Even today, his name stirs strong emotions in Italy and beyond, as a warning, a wound, and a shadow that still lingers in the corners of history. The story of Benito Mussolini does not end with his death. It endures as a lesson about power, the dangers of blind loyalty, and the high price of forgetting the past. Let us now turn to another remarkable figure of royal descent. King Carol II of Romania was born on the 15th of October in the year 1893 at Peel's Castle in Cinea, a picturesque royal residence nestled in the Carpathian Mountains. From the moment of his birth, Carol's life was woven into the turbulent fabric of Romanian history. He was the eldest son of Crown Prince Ferdinand and Princess Marie of Edinburgh, a lineage that tied him both to Romania and the powerful British royal house. But behind the grandeur of his birth lay a country struggling with identity, nationalism, and growing unrest. How did this young prince, born into privilege and tradition, find himself navigating scandal, exile, and the rise of extremism? Could he have been a modernizing king, a builder of unity and reform? Or was he simply a flawed ruler, tangled in personal ambition and shadowed by controversy? Carol's early years were steeped in imperial ceremony and royal discipline, yet he was no passive heir. As a child, he defied tutors, scorned royal protocol, and developed a rebellious spirit. His mother, Queen Marie, intelligent and politically shrewd, had high hopes for her son, but even she struggled to rein in his impulsive nature. Raised at court during a time of shifting alliances and Balkan conflict, Carol's education was fragmented. He studied in Paris, Dresden, and at a military academy in Potsdam, each place shaping his view of monarchy, military power, and personal liberty. But even as he gained knowledge and experience, he became increasingly disillusioned with the expectations placed on him as Romania's future king. What emerged was a prince already restless with duty and dangerously enchanted by freedom. As a young man, Carol II of Romania was not content to simply wait for the crown. Eager to escape the tight grip of royal tradition, he set off across Europe, a royal student seeking knowledge, adventure, and perhaps himself. Yet wherever he went, rumors followed. Carol's formal education began in Romania but soon expanded abroad. In 1909, he enrolled at a military school in Potsdam, Germany, where he studied under the watchful eye of Kaiser Wilhelm II. It was there that he absorbed the martial discipline and grandeur of German imperial power. But Carol was never one to be fully shaped by others. He found life in Berlin both rigid and isolating, a far cry from the freedom he craved. Paris offered a stark contrast. In the cafes and boulevards of the French capital, Carol encountered art, ideas, and temptation. His time there was less about textbooks and more about experience, and those experiences soon turned into scandal. In a move that shocked the Romanian court, Carol abandoned his military training and ran off with Zizi Lambrino, a Romanian commoner with whom he had fallen deeply in love. Against his family's wishes, he married her in Odessa in 1918. The marriage was declared invalid by Romanian authorities, but the damage was done. This scandal marked the beginning of Carol's long pattern of defying convention. His father, King Ferdinand, was furious. Carol was forced to return home in disgrace, only to be sent back into quiet exile. The prince who had once symbolized Romania's bright future now stood as a figure of uncertainty and rebellion. The stage was set. Carol's life would not follow the usual script of monarchy. He was now a prince unbound and unpredictable. As a young royal far from home, Prince Carol's life took a dramatic and deeply personal turn in 1918. While stationed with the Romanian army during World War I, he met Zizi Lambrino, a woman of noble birth, but not of royal standing. Their bond was instant, tender, and passionate, a world apart from the rigid expectations of royal tradition. Despite fierce opposition from his parents, especially King Ferdinand and Queen Marie, Carol defied protocol. In the city of Odessa, on the 31st of August in the year 1918, he secretly married Zizi. Their union shocked the Romanian court and ignited a public scandal. The government refused to recognize the marriage, arguing it was unconstitutional for an heir to marry without royal approval. Soon, Carol was forced to annul the marriage under pressure, but the emotional wounds lingered. Zizi gave birth to a son, Mircea, whom Carol later denied officially acknowledging. The affair marked the beginning of Carol's pattern of rebellion and impulsive choices, putting love and desire above dynastic duty. Their story became a symbol of royal defiance clashing with tradition. Zizi, though pushed to the margins, never fully left Carol's heart. The shadows of their relationship would echo throughout the rest of his life, shaping not only his future romances, but also the public's perception of him as a man divided between passion and obligation. Carol's forbidden love with Zizi Lambrino revealed a side of royalty rarely seen, raw, vulnerable, and tragically human. In the wake of scandal and family pressure, Prince Carol's standing within the Romanian monarchy began to unravel. By 1925, his turbulent relationship with Zizi Lambrino had already cast doubt on his suitability as future king. But it was his next affair, with the striking Elena Lupescu, that pushed the royal court to a breaking point. Refusing to bend to convention or expectation, Carol made a bold and controversial decision. On the 28th of December in the year 1925, he renounced his rights to the throne. His official abdication shocked Europe and humiliated the Romanian royal family. His young son, Michael, was declared heir, and a regency council was formed to govern until the child came of age. Carol left Romania and lived in exile across various European cities, yet he never fully accepted his fate. From Paris to Lisbon, he moved through high society circles, watched closely by diplomats and journalists alike. Rumors of his longing to return grew louder with each passing year. By the early 1930s, Romania was in a state of political fragility. The Regency Council struggled to maintain authority, and public confidence in the monarchy weakened. Sensing opportunity, Carol prepared for a calculated return. On the 6th of June in the year 1930, Carol unexpectedly landed in Bucharest. The government, unprepared and divided, allowed him to reclaim the throne, not through force, but by sheer political timing. In an extraordinary twist, the prince who had once walked away returned as king, reshaping Romania's monarchy and setting the stage for a reign marked by ambition, manipulation, and spectacle. Carol's return to Romania in June of 1930 sent shockwaves through the political and royal establishment. Without any formal invitation or legal process, he arrived unannounced, confident, composed, and ready to reclaim power. His son, young King Michael, was quietly removed from the throne, and Carol was proclaimed king the very next day. It was a bloodless coup, carried out not with weapons, but with will. The transition stunned the nation. Parliament approved the move, but it was clear that the decision had been made under pressure and confusion. Carol's ascension did not reflect public consent or legal succession. It was a carefully staged return to power by a man who had once walked away from it all. In the early days of his reign, Carol presented himself as a modern monarch. He wore military uniforms, met with ministers, and posed with schoolchildren, projecting an image of strength and national renewal. But beneath this surface was a deep mistrust of Romania's democratic institutions. Carol believed he alone could safeguard the country from chaos, and this belief would guide the autocratic path his rule would eventually take. Still, many Romanians welcomed him. Tired of instability, they hoped he would bring order. Foreign observers were more cautious. Some admired his flair and charisma, while others saw the warning signs of a self-centered ruler seeking absolute control. Carol's return was not just a personal comeback. It marked a new era in Romanian politics, one that would soon see the lines between monarchy, state, and ambition blur in ways that reshaped the nation's future. King Carol's palace was not just a place of royal business. It became a stage of whispered scandals, political maneuvering, and emotional betrayal. Behind the grandeur of Romanian court life, Carol's personal choices stirred deep unrest. At the center of it all stood Elena Lupescu, his mistress and constant companion, whose presence challenged the traditions of monarchy and morality alike. Though married to Queen Helen, Carol made no secret of his devotion to Lupescu. She appeared alongside him in public events, lived in the royal residences, and influenced appointments in the government. To the old aristocracy, her position was shocking. To politicians, it was dangerous. And to Queen Helen, it was an open wound, one that led her to leave the palace and retreat from court life entirely. The court soon divided into factions, those loyal to the king, those loyal to the queen, and those who quietly despised them both. Ministers feared the growing influence of Lupescu, whose network of allies seemed to stretch through every corner of the government. Royal audiences turned into tests of loyalty. Court dinners were filled with tension, where smiles hid suspicion. Internationally, newspapers whispered about the red-haired enchantress who held sway over Romania's monarch. Diplomats grew wary. Some admired Carol's boldness, while others questioned his judgment. At home, his popularity began to slip. The Romanian people wanted stability, not soap opera politics. In this atmosphere of gossip and manipulation, Carol's rule began to shift. His focus turned inward, his trust grew thin, and his court, once the center of Romanian pride, became a battlefield of ambition, jealousy, and quiet rebellion. Elena Lupescu was no ordinary companion to a king. With her striking red hair, sharp wit, and unwavering confidence, she entered the royal stage not just as a lover, but as a force of influence reshaping Romania's monarchy from within. Born into a modest family, Elena had neither noble blood nor traditional refinement, but she possessed something far more dangerous: charm, ambition, and political instinct. Carol met her in the early 1920s, and their connection was immediate. Though he was married to Queen Helen, he chose Elena without hesitation. Their bond defied social expectations, royal custom, and even the pleas of foreign diplomats. To many Romanians, she was a scandal, a threat to the sacred traditions of the crown. But to Carol, she was his anchor, his partner, and eventually, his shadow in power. Lupescu's influence extended far beyond the palace walls. She was said to advise on key political decisions, sway the appointment of ministers, and even control access to the king himself. Critics accused her of building a network of corruption and favoritism. Allies praised her as intelligent and loyal, the only one who truly understood the complexities of Carol's mind and heart. For years, Elena lived between official silence and unofficial control. She had no title, yet ruled the palace corridors. She signed no decrees, yet shaped the future of Romania. And though her name sparked outrage in newspapers and in parliament, she never wavered. Her presence became a symbol of Carol's defiance, a king willing to follow love over duty and passion over protocol. But power built on intimacy is rarely stable. As Romania's political storms grew darker, Elena's position and the king's reputation would face their greatest tests. By the late 1930s, Romania was a kingdom in turmoil, plagued by political instability, economic unrest, and the growing menace of extremism. King Carol II, frustrated by the chaos and distrustful of democratic forces, made a bold and controversial move. On the 10th of February in the year 1938, he suspended the constitution and dissolved all political parties. With a single royal decree, the king transformed his rule into an absolute monarchy. This moment marked the beginning of the royal dictatorship. Carol justified his decision by claiming the nation needed unity and order. He argued that party politics had failed Romania and only the crown could restore stability. He introduced a new constitution that vastly increased his powers, established a corporatist framework, and weakened civil liberties. Parliament became a formality. Free speech was curtailed. The press was censored. And behind the scenes, Elena Lupescu remained an influential advisor. To enforce his will, Carol relied on the royal camarilla, a close circle of loyalists and opportunists. Corruption became rampant. Loyalty to the king was rewarded with privilege, while dissent was silenced. But Carol's grip on power was not as secure as it appeared. The far-right Iron Guard still loomed in the background, growing in strength and bitterness, furious at being sidelined. Despite the autocracy, Carol promoted a grand image of kingship. He toured the country in military uniform, launched nationalist campaigns, and filled public spaces with his portrait. But beneath the surface, resentment simmered. His royal dictatorship, born of desperation, was built on fragile foundations. The people whispered, the enemies plotted, and the king, once hailed as a unifier, was now seen by many as a monarch who had betrayed Romania's democratic hopes. By the end of the 1930s, Romania stood on a dangerous precipice. King Carol II's royal dictatorship had silenced political parties and critics, but it had not solved the country's deeper problems. Romania's economy was fragile, its people restless, and its neighbors, particularly Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, were growing more aggressive with each passing month. Carol faced an impossible situation. On one side, Germany exerted increasing pressure, demanding trade deals and political loyalty. On the other, the Soviet Union eyed Romanian territory, especially Bessarabia, with open ambition. Meanwhile, Britain and France, traditional Western allies, were distracted by their own crises and offered little more than vague assurances. Inside Romania, the situation was just as bleak. The Iron Guard, furious at being excluded from power, turned to violence. Assassinations, bombings, and public demonstrations destabilized the streets. Carol responded with crackdowns, imprisonments, and executions. The nation was turning inward, afraid, divided, and unsure of who its real enemies were. Adding to the chaos, the king's inner circle became increasingly corrupt and self-serving. The royal camarilla thrived on favoritism and bribery, deepening public resentment. While Carol tried to project strength through military parades and patriotic ceremonies, the truth was hard to hide. Romania was cracking under the weight of authoritarianism and fear. Desperate to protect the nation, Carol signed treaties, made deals, and shifted alliances, but none could guarantee Romania's safety. Europe was on the verge of war, and Romania was caught in the middle. For Carol II, it was a time of impossible choices, rising enemies, and a rapidly fading crown. As the 1930s drew to a close, the Iron Guard, Romania's radical, ultranationalist movement, surged forward with terrifying speed. Founded on anti-Semitic, fascist, and mystic beliefs, the Guard promised national salvation through violence and purity. Its members viewed themselves as spiritual warriors, battling corruption, foreign influence, and the perceived decay of Romanian society. King Carol II had once tolerated the Iron Guard, hoping to control it from a distance. But as its following grew and its rhetoric became more extreme, the group became impossible to ignore. Led by Corneliu Zelia Codreanu, the Guard attracted thousands of young followers, especially among university students and disillusioned citizens. They wore green shirts, marched in formation, and glorified death in the name of nationalism. Carol struck back with brutal force. In 1938, he ordered the arrest of Codreanu and many top leaders. A show trial followed, ending with their execution under secretive circumstances. Though the regime claimed justice had been done, many Romanians saw it as a political assassination. The Iron Guard did not die. It went underground, growing more fanatical with each passing year. In the shadows, new leaders emerged, more violent, more vengeful. The Iron Guard became both martyr and menace, waiting for the moment to strike. Carol's repression only fueled their hatred. By eliminating moderate voices, he had cleared the path for chaos. The seeds of fascist revolution were firmly planted. And while Carol still wore the crown, his enemies no longer feared him, they awaited revenge. Romania's streets echoed with slogans, threats, and prayers for blood. A storm was coming, and the Iron Guard would be at its center. By the late 1930s, King Carol II's reign had become a battleground of wills. With the Iron Guard threatening rebellion and foreign powers circling Romania's borders, Carol found himself locked in a desperate fight to retain control. But the conflict wasn't just external, it was deeply personal, political, and dangerous. Carol's most pressing internal challenge came from General Ion Antonescu, a military leader with growing popularity and rigid nationalist ideals. The two men distrusted each other bitterly. Carol saw Antonescu as a rival with dictatorial ambitions. Antonescu saw Carol as a corrupt monarch, distracted by palace intrigues and personal indulgences. Meanwhile, Carol tried to strengthen his grip by sidelining political parties, manipulating ministers, and concentrating power around the royal court. But these actions only deepened public resentment. The press whispered of tyranny, and political figures began to shift alliances behind closed doors. Even the army's loyalty became uncertain. Tensions exploded when Carol reinstated the Iron Guard in a risky compromise, hoping to create a unity government. But this move only heightened instability. Violence returned to the streets. Assassinations, riots, and power plays defined the capital's atmosphere. In trying to play both sides, military and fascist, Carol had played himself into a corner. His final standoff came in 1940, when Antonescu demanded full control of the government. With pressure mounting from Nazi Germany and public rage boiling over, Carol had little choice. He named Antonescu conjugator, or leader, and was soon forced to abdicate. The king who once ruled by decree had now been outmaneuvered by the very forces he had unleashed. Romania would never be the same. The royal showdowns were over, and the monarchy had lost. The year was 1940, and King Carol II stood on the edge of collapse. His rule, once held together by force, charm, and calculated alliances, was now crumbling beneath the weight of war, betrayal, and a nation's fury. Romania had become a cauldron of fear and frustration. In June, disaster struck. The Soviet Union seized Bessarabia and northern Bukovina, and Carol, caught between appeasing Germany and resisting Soviet aggression, lost both territories without a fight. The humiliation ignited a firestorm. The military, already distrustful of Carol's leadership, viewed the loss as treason. Protesters filled the streets, crying for justice, change, and vengeance. General Ion Antonescu, now emboldened by support from both the army and the German-backed Iron Guard, demanded power. On the 5th of September, Carol appointed him as prime minister, but the gesture came too late. Antonescu quickly moved to isolate the king, stripping away allies and consolidating authority. On the 6th of September in 1940, under mounting pressure and fearing civil war, King Carol II abdicated the throne in favor of his 19-year-old son, Michael. The ceremony was brief and joyless. Carol signed the decree, removed his uniform, and prepared to leave the country that had once adored and later despised him. By the next day, Carol boarded a train and began a long journey into exile. His lover, Elena Lupescu, remained by his side. Their departure was guarded, secretive, and somber. Crowds lined the tracks, not in farewell, but in relief. Romania had shed its controversial king. A young monarch stood in his place, but true power now rested with Antonescu. Carol's chapter had ended, not with applause, but with silence and shadows. After leaving Romania in September of 1940, King Carol II entered a life of exile that was far from regal. Alongside his companion Elena Lupescu, he moved restlessly across Europe, chased by war, politics, and bitter memories. He was a king without a kingdom, a ruler without a realm, and the world had moved on. His first stop was Spain, where Franco's government allowed him temporary refuge. But Carol remained politically radioactive. Few nations wanted to host a man linked with dictatorship, scandal, and national humiliation. He lived in limbo, constantly watching global headlines, hoping for an opportunity to return or reclaim influence. Despite his reduced status, Carol continued to act like a monarch. He wrote lengthy political manifestos, held mock royal courts, and lobbied foreign leaders. But his calls went unanswered. Romania was now under the firm grip of General Antonescu and later under communist influence. His name was erased from official memory. Carol's wealth dwindled as he moved from Spain to Portugal, then to Cuba and Mexico. Each place brought new isolation. Diplomats and journalists lost interest. Even many former supporters distanced themselves, viewing him as a relic of an unstable past. Still, he remained loyal to Alina Lupescu. Their bond, often criticized in his reign, became his anchor in exile. In one of his final public statements, he claimed no regrets, only sorrow that he could not serve Romania longer. By the time World War II ended, the world order had changed. Romania had fallen behind the Iron Curtain, and Carol, once a crowned king, was now merely a traveler with fading relevance. He was still alive, but his power, his throne, and his place in history had slipped quietly away. As World War II raged across Europe, King Carol II watched from the sidelines, exiled and increasingly irrelevant. Yet the events unfolding across the continent were closely tied to his past choices. Romania's position, once precariously shaped by Carol's diplomacy and authoritarian rule, was now consumed by war, alliances, and occupation. In the early years of the war, Romania found itself under the brutal influence of Nazi Germany. General Ion Antonescu, who replaced Carol after his abdication, aligned the country with Adolf Hitler's regime. Carol's efforts to resist fascist movements during his rule now stood in ironic contrast to what Romania had become, a willing partner in Hitler's military machine. From his distant homes in Spain, Cuba, and later Mexico, Carol remained obsessively engaged with Romanian affairs. He followed each shift in alliance, each battle near the Carpathians, and every report of atrocities. But he had no role, no authority, and no platform to intervene. Diplomats ignored his letters. Governments dismissed his opinions. Romania's fate was no longer his to shape. The rise of Soviet power further complicated the picture. By 1944, as Germany's hold on Eastern Europe weakened, Soviet forces swept into Romania. A new era was dawning, one that had no room for monarchs in exile. Carol could only watch as the throne he once held vanished behind an iron curtain. A communist regime emerged, and the idea of a royal restoration became a fantasy. The war had changed more than borders. It had erased entire systems of power. He had once ruled in grandeur, issuing decrees and redrawing policies. Now he was just a witness to history, his legacy caught between memory and myth, a king unmoored in a world at war. After decades of movement through Europe, Cuba, and Mexico, King Carol II settled in exile far from the palaces of Romania, in a quiet villa outside Estoril, Portugal, and later in Brazil. By the late 1950s, the once powerful monarch lived a life of fading influence and distant memories, surrounded by the shadows of a past he could never outrun. Carol's later years were marked by reflection and contradiction. He continued his relationship with Alina Lupescu, eventually marrying her in secret. The two lived a relatively secluded life, hosting occasional visitors, granting interviews, and obsessively collecting Romanian newspapers. Carol filled pages of journals with political analysis, royal nostalgia, and letters that were never answered. His attempts to remain relevant in post-war politics were futile. Romania was now a communist state, and his monarchy erased. The royal court in exile was mostly symbolic. Still, Carol held onto his title and dignity, convinced that history would one day vindicate him. He had ambitions of returning to Romania, or at least securing a place in the global conversation about post-war Eastern Europe. But those hopes faded as years passed. Romania moved forward, and Carol remained frozen in time. On the 4th of April in the year 1953, King Carol II died in Estoril, Portugal. He was buried in the pantheon of the Braganza dynasty in Lisbon, a foreign resting place for a king without a throne. Romania, under communist control, made no official acknowledgement of his passing. It would be decades before his remains were returned to his homeland. Carol's legacy is still debated. Was he a modernizer caught in a storm of fascism and betrayal, or a selfish monarch who placed personal indulgence over national duty? His life reflects the tensions of a world shifting between old empires and modern republics. Even in death, he remained an exile, a king without a crown, a father disowned by his son, and a ruler whose throne crumbled not in war, but in scandal and regret. What do you think about Benito Mussolini? Was Mussolini a bold nationalist, a man who brought order, pride, and industrial ambition to a fractured Italy? Or a dangerous ideologue, whose hunger for power, alliance with Hitler, and war crimes led his nation to ruin and shame? Did he try to build an empire, or simply revive illusions of greatness? And what about King Carol II of Romania? Was Carol a misunderstood modernizer, a monarch who fought to preserve his country's sovereignty and tried to balance tradition with reform? Or a flawed ruler, more devoted to his personal passions than his royal duties, remembered for scandal, dictatorship, and exile? Did he protect his throne or weaken it with his choices? Did these men shape their nations with strength and strategy, or with self-interest and miscalculation? Were they victims of chaotic times or architects of their own downfall? Can leadership be measured by legacy or by what it costs a nation to follow? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales from the past, stories of courage, choice, and the quiet force behind history. Thank you so much for watching.